Mary Ann Cotton, the first serial killer in British history. Mary Ann Cotton, born as Mary Ann Robson, was born on the 31st of October 1832 in County Durham to Margaret and Michael Robson. Mary had a brother and sister, but sadly her sister passed away at 4 months old. When Mary was 8 years old, she moved to the village Morton in County Durham with her family. Not long after their move, Mary's father was at work and fell 150 feet to his death down a mine shaft in the year of February 1842. As their family home was the property to the coal company where her father worked, Margaret, her mum, Mary, and her brother became homeless by getting evicted. In 1843, a year after her father's death, her mother, Margaret, went on to marry George Sloth. He also was a miner. When Mary was 16, she left home to become a nurse. But after 3 years, she returned back home to train as a dressmaker. In 1852, when Mary was 20 years old, she met and married a man named William Mowbray. Their daughter, Isabella, was born in 1860, and in 1861 they had another daughter, Margaret Jane, but sadly she died after becoming very unwell. 2 years later, in 1863, they had another daughter, Margaret Jane, and not long after their son was born, John William, but he sadly died the year after becoming very unwell with gastric fever. In January 1865, Mary's husband died suddenly with gastric fever, and not long after, Mary collected the insurance payout. For her husband and her children of £35. That would be the equivalent of about £3,500 now. Not that long after Mary's husband's death, Mary was in another relationship, and during that relationship, Mary's 3.5-year-old daughter, Mary Jane, died of typhoid fever, leaving Mary with only one child, little John William, who she sent to her mother's so she could get a job in the infirmary. In 1865, Mary married one of her patients, George Ward, and not even a year later, George passed away, and Mary collected the insurance money for husband number 2. Sorry about that. 5 people now have died in Mary's company, 2 husbands and 3 children. Having nowhere to live, Mary's friend offered Mary a room and a job in her home as being a helping housekeeper for her and her husband, James Robinson. Not even a month went by, and Hannah, her friend, died with gastric fever, leaving James behind, turning to Mary for comfort, and she became pregnant once again. Mary's mum became ill with hepatitis, so Mary offered to stay with her and look after her while she was ill. 9 days after Mary had arrived back at her mum's, her mum sadly passed away after complaining of having stomach cramps. At the age of 54 years old, her mum was. Mary brought her daughter Isabella back to James's, and not long back, her daughter Isabella developed stomach pains, excuse me, and died. So did 2 of James's children. All 3 were buried, and in April 1867, Mary received all 3 life insurances for the children. She then went on to marry James Robinson, and on the 11th of August 1867, they had their first child with each other, Mary Isabella. And in November 1867, she also became ill and died in February 1868. Their second child, George, was born on the 18th of June 1869, and Mary's husband, James, became suspicious of his wife, Mary, persisting in wanting him to get insured. He also discovered Mary had run up debts of £60 and stolen more than £50 that she was meant to bank behind his back. She had also pawned household valuables, and he had had enough. He didn't want to risk his only son left dying in case his suspicions were right. So he threw Mary out and retained custody of their son George. Mary was homeless, living on the streets and desperate, until her friend Margaret Cotton introduced her to her brother Frederick Cotton. He had already lost 2 of his children out of 4 and recently became widowed. Margaret had acted as a substitute mother to her brother's children, Frederick Jr. and Charles, but late March 1870, Margaret died after suffering from severe stomach pains. Margaret's death left Mary Ann to console Frederick, and soon after, her next child was due. They both married in September 1870, and their son Robert was born early 1871. In December 1871, Frederick died from gastric fever, and insurance was paid out to Mary once again. After her 3rd husband's death, she moved a lodger in, Joseph, and she started working as a nurse in a ward for people recovering from smallpox. Mary started a relationship with one of her patients, Richard Mann, and was pregnant again with her ninth child. Back at home, her lodger and son Robert became ill with severe stomach pains, and both died of gastric fever soon after one another. Mary's downfall came when a parish officer, Thomas Riley, asked her to nurse a woman excuse me, who was ill with smallpox. She kept complaining to Thomas Riley that her last surviving boy, Charles Cotton, was in the way, and asked Thomas if he could be committed to the workhouse as he was sick. Thomas had previously served as a coroner's assistant, and he said to Mary, "You will need to be with him." And she said to Thomas Riley, "Don't worry, the boy is sick. He won't be troubled long. He will go like the rest of the Cottons." Not even 5 days had passed when Mary told Thomas the boy had died. Thomas went to the police and convinced the doctor to delay the writing a death certificate until the death could be investigated. Mary Ann's first visit after her son Charles' death was not to the doctor, but to the insurance office, where she discovered that the money for her son's death won't be paid out until the death certificate was issued. An inquest was held, and the jury returned a verdict of natural causes. Mary then claimed Thomas Riley made the accusations against her because she refused his advances towards her. The local newspaper latched onto the story and discovered Mary had moved around northern England and lost 3 husbands, a lodger, a friend, her mother, and 9 children, all who had died from stomach fevers. The rumours gave Dr. Kilburn, who had attended Charles before he died, suspicion. He investigated the samples of blood he took and kept, and arsenic came up. He told the police, who arrested Mary Ann, and she was charged with the murder of her son Charles. Her trial was delayed until after the delivery of her 10th and final child. The 10th of January 1873, she gave birth to a girl, Margaret Edith Cotton. Mary's trial began on the 5th of March 1873. Charles Russell was appointed as the prosecution, and the Cotton case was the first of several famous poisoning cases he would be involved in during his career. After the prosecution gave evidence, the jury retired for 90 minutes, returning with a guilty verdict. Mary's execution took place at Durham Gaol on the 24th of March 1873 by William the Executioner, and when she was hung, she died not from her neck breaking, but by strangulation caused by the rope being rigged too short, possibly deliberately. Mary Ann took her short steps to reach the gallows trapdoor unaided. She then had to be manipulated onto the trapdoors below the noose. Two male wardens stood off the drop either side of Mary Ann. She was now shivering in an uncontrollable manner. The executioner, William Calcraft, acted fast to place the white hood over Mary's shaking head. You could see her frantic inward and outward breathing through the hood. Calcraft, the executioner, reached up to pull the noose hanging from the centre of the beam. He adjusted the noose so it was tight and placed the 1¼ inch knot to Mary's right side of her ear. She could be heard sobbing, whimpering, "Lord, rescue my soul. Have mercy on me." Her ankles were then pinned and restrained with leather straps. The executioner looked away quickly towards the bolt of the trapdoor, checked the wardens were safe and clear, and drew back the bolt without being given the signal. Mary Ann's body plummeted sharply as the drop opened with a terrible boom. It was so loud it echoed around the execution site. The prisoners were screaming, shouting. They knew the execution wasn't rigged right. Mary dropped about 2 foot with her head jerking to the left side of her body. She was swinging around, her hands clasping in a frantic attempt to tear off the throttling rope from around her neck. Her legs were kicking desperately, trying to be released from the restraints. She swung side to side with everyone looking in on her, hanging. Seeing she didn't die instantly, struggling for her own life. The executioner knelt down to push harder on her shoulders in effort to end her life, looking out to the public, reassuring them it was all going correctly to plan. Her body was withering, twisting and turning. Her white hood showed blood splatters around her nose and mouth. The executioner gave Mary one last hard tug on the rope to make sure she would be nothing more than a lifeless corpse. And she was left hanging for a further period of 1 hour by law. Mary Ann's execution took longer to take than the usual execution would take. It was slow and painful for her right to the very end. The executioner made sure he throttled Mary right to the very end of her death. And that's my story on Mary Ann Cotton, the worst evil, I think, case that I've researched so far. Evil woman. And yeah, I think she got what she deserved at the end of being hung. But yeah, if you agree with me, if she got what she deserved, or if you disagree, please leave your comments below. If you've heard of this story before, please let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And thank you for watching again. Big love. Peace out.